Hey everyone, hey, good to not see you, but at least know that you hear me. And by the way, I have to say that the ad of Vue School that I have just seen, it was great, really great. So, as I was introduced, my name is Filip Rakowski. I'm a co-founder and CTO of Vue Storefront. If you know Vue Storefront, raise your hand. I won't see this, but we have to act at least a little bit socially to feel a little bit better on online conferences. I'm also a member of the Tech Council of Mach Alliance. So Mach Alliance is an organization that is grouping the biggest e-commerce vendors and agencies that are pushing the industry forward around the newest technologies. And if you haven't raised your hand and you don't know what Vue Storefront is, well, the quickest explanation is that we live in a very interesting time in the e-commerce space, but not only e-commerce, in general, development space, where we have so many great services and vendors that are offering great APIs. But the problem is, like, they only deliver the APIs, and your customers, they don't consume APIs, they consume frontends, right? Then don't care about your APIs. They really want a great, delightful frontend experience. And for e-commerce, it's really not easy to make one. So this is exactly what we provide. Like, Vue Storefront is basically a frontend framework that is allowing you to very quickly build a great performing storefront, and it's based on Vue.js and Nuxt. So you could think, yes, it's super easy, but the truth is, like, there's so many things to take care of, and also you don't really want to take care of. So our mission is, to simplify this, but also to accelerate the process of building storefronts. We have a lot of out-of-the-box integrations, and the good news is most of that is open source. So just go to GitHub, check it out. If you want to use it, use it. If you don't want to use it, don't use it. But maybe leave a star. I would appreciate that a lot. But this is not the topic I wanted to talk about today. Let's talk about performance, or to be more precise, measuring performance. And these days, web performance, I think, is one of the most important things everyone wants to optimize on their apps, at least in the e-commerce space. But the whole market is understanding that speed drives revenue, really. And it's clear to everyone how dramatic the impact of poorly optimized websites is on business. Yet I think as an industry, we kind of failed in recognizing that web performance and speed, they are not simple. And because of that, we really misuse the most common tool to measure it, which is Google Lighthouse. So my talk today is exactly about that. And you may not believe me, by 5 years ago, when we were writing the first lines of Vue Storefront, I still remember that time the topic of front-end performance, it was really like non-existent in the web dev space. So to give you a perspective, like, sit comfortably, imagine we are in 2017. And at that time, the SPA frameworks, the JavaScript frameworks, they were just gaining the huge traction, and AngularJS and React, they were actually the ones that were most popular and well established. AngularJS was a dominant, React.js was just gaining popularity, and even you just released the second major version of Vue.js that only a few years later became one of the 3 most popular SPA frameworks, but it wasn't like that at that time. At that time, it was a huge bet, and I'm not sure if you even recognize all the logos on the right side. So one of them is obviously Vue. Then we have Aurelia.js. I'm wondering if anyone remembers Aurelia.js. Then you have Meteor. You should know Meteor, at least from Ivan's involvement. And there's also Ember, which is very old, but also quite well known for a very good developer experience at that time. Also, at that time, almost really no one cared how fast the website built with those frameworks were. And the world was super simple. And if you wanted to dig into the front-end performance topics, you were usually ending up in websites looking like that. And this is the Apple website from 1997. It just wasn't cool to do web performance. And I think it's safe to say that the mainstream, the business mainstream, also didn't care. And it was like that, but it was about to change very soon because of a little friends that landed in our pockets, mobile phones. Because as long as we are using PCs and laptops as primary machines to consume the web, no one really seemed to be very concerned with the growing size of websites. And as you can see, they were growing significantly. because both CPU power and the internet bandwidth, they were progressing much faster than the websites were growing their size. And it all changed when mobile started to become the preferred way of consuming the web. So according to Google research in 2017, it took on average 15.3 seconds to fully load a web page on mobile phone. So imagine we are at the moment where all these very heavy websites that were meant to run on laptops and desktops, right now they are being run on mobile. Of course, like responsive web design is already a thing, but the issue is like these are exactly the same websites, just differently sized, like the weight exactly the same. So 15.3 seconds is a lot. Like if you count this in your head, it's definitely not the time that you will wait for a website to fully load. You won't even wait 3 seconds, I guarantee you. So at that time, the awareness about the impact of poor mobile performance on the business, it started to emerge. And thanks to the companies like Google, actually. But the problem is we're still lacking an easy way to link those two components. And on April 2018, the Google Lighthouse landed into a developer, Chrome developer tools. And when it started gaining popularity, everything changed, really. I remember when it was introduced and became really rapidly adopted in the e-commerce space. And I think it was very similar in all the other spaces, following the hype for a thing called progressive web apps in 2018. Like, do you even remember the term progressive web apps? Probably only if you're running Lighthouse and you see this PWA number. So everyone were obsessed with progressive web apps. Everyone were obsessed about web performance. And the funny thing is, like almost no one really knew anything about both. And the problem is, we are here right now in 2023, and not that much has changed since then. And this is my observation. This is why I'm doing this talk. So what makes Google Lighthouse so widely adopted is its simplicity. You run a test, you paste an URL, you run a test, and you get a number between 1 and 100 that tells you how good or how bad the web performance or any other characteristics of your website is. And everyone, really everyone, even those who don't have any technical background, can understand that. Like, it's a number from 1 to 100, right? And some numbers are red, some are yellow, some are green. Like, everyone will understand that. And that's the root of the problem, because the reality is not that simple. And web performance or user experience, they cannot be represented as a single number. In addition, there is a lot of nuances around how Google Lighthouse works, how the audit works. And to use it as a reliable source of knowledge, you really have to be aware of this context. The number itself is telling you nothing, really, trust me. And I will prove it in the next parts of this talk. So we will navigate through all the nuances. And at the end of this talk, you will know exactly where things are coming from and what I think is more important, when not to trust them. So let's start with a simple question. What does Google Lighthouse actually measure, and how we can use this information? Because I have a feeling, and honestly, it's not even a feeling, it's more like an observation, that many people don't really try to answer these questions. They just bluntly assume that the score has to be high to be right, and if it's low, it's not right. And that's all they need to know. So let's dig. As we can read on the website, the goal of Google Lighthouse is to measure page quality. And the audit divides the quality into performance, accessibility, best practices, and SEO. And all of those combined, they should give you more or less like a good perspective on the quality of the website. And by that, try to accurately predict, and I really want to put focus on the word predict, what would be the real user experience, because this is the goal of the Lighthouse. Like, they're trying to measure the page quality to tell you what would be the experience of your users. The truth is, like, there is no audit that will give you any definitive answers. They are only giving guidelines, and like the name Lighthouse has its purpose. There are some things that are collecting data from your real users, and this is super useful, but Lighthouse is not one of them. So as I said, it divides the score into 4 categories. There's also 5th categories, which is progressive web app, and it is only a Boolean. So it is telling if either your website is a progressive web app, which means that it is installable, it has a service worker, and it runs on secure connection, or that it's not. And Google has always promoted this performance score as the most important one. And in the heads of the general audience, when you say Lighthouse score, probably everyone will think performance score. So we can also say that by this, the quality page for them means a page with a high performance score. And don't get me wrong here. Oh, there was something that was supposed to be on the slide. For some reason, it's not loaded. So anyway, like, don't get me wrong here. I think performance is definitely a very important and major factor influencing page quality and the end user experience. But the fact that we got so obsessed with just one of the 4 metrics is giving the false impression that the only thing that matters to the end user is performance. And like, you are also the end user. Like, is this the only thing that matters to you? Of course not. And, you know, a lot of companies and a lot of managers and decision makers really think that, you know, if you want to make the real user experience good, we just have to make performance good. And sometimes they're even judging, you know, the whole migration and the whole rewrite of the page only by the Lighthouse score, if it was better or worse, even if the business metrics are telling different things. And I'm not saying this, you know, just by imagining this. Like, it's mostly based on the real cases and things that I witnessed. And, you know, it really, like, a Lighthouse number can't tell you even if the page is fast or slow. And I think a good analogy here is weight. Like, is 90 kilograms a lot? You can't tell just by knowing the number. It really depends how tall someone is, how much of it is fat, because, you know, fat, the bigger amount of fat actually could weigh the same as a very small amount of muscle. So we need to know this data. We need to know how much fat, how much muscle, how tall someone is, to actually, you know, we need to know if it's man or woman, to actually say if 90 kilograms is a lot or maybe not a lot. And it's exactly the same with the Lighthouse. Oh, okay, so here is the wave. And, you know, if we will try to go deeper, and if we would try to predict like where this kind of thinking would lead us, where looking at numbers and making decisions will lead us without broader context, well, probably it will lead us to disasters like banning worldwide cheese consumption. And we don't want that to happen. So let's understand how Lighthouse works. So let me quickly explain what is behind the algorithm and how it is actually calculated to make sure that we are all on the same page. So the Lighthouse score is actually calculated from a bunch of other metrics. And each of those metrics has its own weight. And some of those are more important, some of them less. And it's also important to know, because if you're optimizing your Lighthouse score, you should probably start with the things that have the biggest impact and then focus on the things that have the smallest impact. At the same time, if you're optimizing your Lighthouse score like this, and if you're optimizing it only to grow, then there is something wrong. So we know that there are multiple metrics. We know that those metrics have different weights, but what we don't know is that those weights and those metrics, they're changing. The algorithm changes with each version, and I don't think it's something usual. Like, the more Google explores the impact of those metrics on end user experience, the more accurate the weights are. And this is why it makes absolutely no sense to compare your current Lighthouse score to the one from a year or two ago, which usually happens on migrations and often happens when the migration was caused by a poor performance. So most likely the scoring system has changed during that time, and, you know, it could have improved or decreased because the algorithm changed, not because you changed something. And I've seen many people really making that mistakes, that were convinced that their website is actually slower than before even though it wasn't. So the Lighthouse score was lower because the algorithm was changed. But if you're looking at individual metrics, all of them were better. So let's dig deeper. Let's dig deeper into understanding where actually this magical performance score comes from. So we already know half of the truth behind the number. We know how it is calculated, but knowing the algorithm is not everything. Because the second most important thing is knowing where this algorithm is actually running. And we have multiple options for that. Most people use Chrome DevTools to run their Lighthouse audit. So if you open Chrome DevTools, you have a Lighthouse tab. And to be honest, this is probably the least reliable way of doing it. And there are multiple external factors that influence the score. So the download and the rendering speed depends on your CPU and network. And the developers will usually run the test on their shiny MacBooks with 5G cable internet. And in most cases, they will have much better results than the real users. In addition, the browser extensions are also treated as part of the website you're auditing. So you can decrease the impact of those factors by running the test in incognito mode, which will exclude Chrome extensions, and by applying CPU and network throttling. But if you think that will solve all the problem, it won't. You will still see different results or different on different devices. They won't be as much different as before, but they will still be different, and they can vary like 20, even 30% sometimes. This is what I've seen. So we already know that running Lighthouse locally is not reliable. If you want to compare the results with anyone else, and it's definitely not reliable if you want to tell if the supposed end user experience will be good or will be bad. So everyone in the company can run the benchmark, and I promise you, everyone will have different results. So you should always test your website in the same environment and limit the external factors that may influence the score as much as possible. It's really, really, really important. So you could have those more consistent results under the same circumstances in the same environment if you use external environment. And for that, you could use Lighthouse CI. Oh, there's something wrong on the slide. Yeah, for that, you could use Lighthouse CI, which is basically a GitHub action that is running on, that is performing Lighthouse. So every time you make a pull request, it runs, and it gives you a great rundown actually what has changed. And there is something wrong with this slide. I don't know why. It was supposed to show how the audit looks like, but it doesn't. But in general, like instead of regular Lighthouse audit, we also see how it changed from the previous releases. And this is the most important information. Now, there is a third option, and this third option, I think, is the most recommended one, at least the most recommended one by me, and it is called PageSpeed Insights. So what is PageSpeed Insights? So PageSpeed Insights is a website made by Google itself, and you can use it to perform quick Lighthouse tests on basically any website. And you're doing this remotely on Google Data Center. So that's the biggest difference. You're not running this on your local machine. You're not running it on any of your environments. You're just running this on the Google Data Center. And PageSpeed Insights usually uses the data center that is the closest one to your location, hence the map. But sometimes you could use another one if the closest one is under heavy load or out of order for some reason. So this is why you could sometimes get significantly different results on the same page in tests made one after another. But it's not the only thing that matters, because you could also get different results because the overall page load is different and the response times are different. Though it's still much better than using your own laptop, because at least this is something that you can send to others. They can do a few tests, and more or less, on average, they will be the same. But even though it will be more consistent, it's still far from being an accurate measurement of real user experience. So at this point, we have three options. We have PageSpeed Insights, we have local Lighthouse CI, we have external Lighthouse CI, and we have local runs through Chrome Google DevTools. And from all of those, I would highly recommend to only use PageSpeed Insights. And the important thing is that the PageSpeed Insights will run a mobile Lighthouse test on emulated Motorola Moto G4, which is like a typical mid-range smartphone. But the thing is, unless all of your users have Motorola Moto G4, they're going to experience the website differently. The good news is PageSpeed Insights will also tell you how your website performs in the real world. So at the top of every PageSpeed Insights audit, you will see 3 core web vitals. So these are like the ones at the very top. And they has to be green to positively impact your SEO results. So core web vitals are measured in the field, which means that these are the actual results that we are getting from your users. And at the bottom, we are getting the synthetic Lighthouse score that runs on Google Data Center. And for a very long time, when we were running PageSpeed Insights, the order was actually the opposite. So at the very top, we saw a Lighthouse score, and at the bottom, we saw the core web vitals. And this was a source of many confusions, because obviously people were looking at a shiny number in the circle at the top and treating this as the most important one, while the one at the bottom is the least important one. The most important ones are the 3 at the top, then the 3 at the bottom, because they're also very important metrics, and one of them will probably replace core web vitals, so interaction to next paint. So it's worth optimizing all of them. Another problem with Lighthouse, apart from the fact that we can measure in really different environments, apart from the fact that the algorithm is changing, apart from the fact that there are so many external factors influencing this, the problem is that Lighthouse is just an algorithm. So it gets input, processes the data, and it gives output. And if we know how it works, we can easily cheat it. And that happens more often than you think, because the Lighthouse is mostly used by people who know tech very well. And it's also used by people who don't know tech very well and demand high scores. So what a clever engineer would do? Cheat. So you can easily find a lot of articles like this one showing how to build a website that is getting a perfect Lighthouse score in a particular category, while in reality delivering a horrible experience. And this is already enough arguments really to be suspicious. But it's equally easy to trick the performance score. You can detect the Lighthouse user agent and just serve a different version of your website for auditing tools. For example, you can quickly remove all the script tags from your server-side rendered applications, and voila, performance improved. And it probably improved to almost 100, because the truth is, for most of the websites, JavaScript is usually the bottleneck. In fact, there are companies out there doing exactly that. So if the score is suspiciously high compared to the website complexity or just the real experience that you have when you load it, there is a really high chance someone is trying to trick you. So we've seen that not that long ago in the e-commerce space, where one of the solutions, CandyPW, tried to cheat their clients with a fake Lighthouse score. And a side note, I never publicly shamed a competitor before, and I never will. But if you're doing shady practices, if you're lying to your customers, I have absolutely no hesitation. So this is just a side note. And also, as another side note, if you think about the root cause of that, things like that wouldn't happen if all of us didn't so blindly believe that the Lighthouse score is the most important score ever. So far, everything that I'm saying feels like a rant, and you could get the impression that, in my opinion, Lighthouse is basically garbage or useless. But this is definitely not my point here. And the truth is, I think it's a wonderful tool. And the fact that Google is trying to find an easy way to help developers identify the potential performance bottlenecks that are impacting user experience is really worth supporting. The problem is not in the tool itself. The problem, as always, lies somewhere else. It's more in the way how we use it, or to be more precise, how we misuse it. And I have no doubts that Lighthouse has contributed to a faster web much more than any other tool before. Maybe Wislow, but does any one of you know Wislow? Exactly. But the name Lighthouse has its purpose. Its goal is to guide on improving the page quality, not give definitive answers, or if this is good or bad. And I've seen websites with a really good user experience and low Lighthouse scores. We will see them in a moment, and vice versa. So good performance is really a trade-off, and you always have to sacrifice something to make it better. Sometimes this is an analytics script. Sometimes it's a fancy dynamic library. Sometimes it's even a feature. So it's not always a good business decision to get rid of them to have better performance. Of course, there are multiple ways of eliminating this impact or decreasing, but the sad truth about the modern front-end framework world is that the more features we add, the worse performances. There are some things out there that try to solve that. Also, island architecture is, I think, the best quick win that we have, but we are still not there. So, to me, Google Lighthouse really shines when we want to quickly compare different versions of our website, and if you want to see if there was an improvement or decrease in performance. It's definitely worth implementing the checks of Lighthouse CI that I just mentioned in your CI/CD pipelines. If you want to do this, just Google Lighthouse CI. There's a GitHub action. Installing this is extremely easy, yet I think it's the best feedback you can get on every PR, really. Because it doesn't matter if your users will also get 80 performance. Maybe they will get 20. But what matters is that you know that, yes, it's significantly decreased, or yes, it is significantly better. That's really all you need to know, at least when you're making a change. So it's definitely worth doing that. What else? I think it's worth auditing websites with similar complexity from your industry to get a sense of the realistic score. In your case, it's not always 100. It's not always 100 you should aim for, because an e-commerce website, it rarely scores above 60. Really, you will rarely see an e-commerce website that's scoring more than 60, while a blog often hits 100. So if you see a blog with a score 20, yeah, that's an embarrassment. So it's important to know what is a good score in your case, in case of your industry, in case of the complexity of your website, maybe even in case of your framework. Lighthouse is not a good tool to measure actual user experiences, and synthetic data will never tell you anything about that. To understand how users are experiencing your website, you have to get the data from your users. And you really don't have to set up any additional monitoring tools to check that, because as we have seen on PageSpeed Insights at the very top, you will see how it is scoring against the most important performance metrics. And I think important to acknowledge, and if you will read the audit, you will actually see this. It's something that they recently added, but this data, this field data, so-called, is collected from the past 30 days. Also, it is collected only on devices using Chrome among real users of your website. So keep that in mind when comparing the score before and after the update, because it will take some time actually to get a new data after 30 days. And the only requirement for collecting your data is actually to make your website crawlable. So every time you visit any website, your Chrome browser is sending information about Core Web Vitals. And this real world data, when you want to just browse it, it comes from a Chrome user experience report, which collects performance metrics from those devices that are using Google Chrome. And you can easily get access to the history of your metrics, or basically any other metrics, in the Crux dashboard in Google Data Studio. So Crux dashboard is a tier to Google. And I keep saying about the differences between so-called lab data that is measured in a specific environment and the real-world data of your users. And it's super important to not optimize for the former. And here is an example why. If you do a PageSpeed Insights benchmark on a few websites, and one of them, I think it's a great example, is Adidas, you will quickly notice that in many cases there is really no relation between a Lighthouse score and performance data from the real users. So here you can find a screenshot from an audit of Adidas website, and we see performance above 80. It is great. It is really good performance, especially that this is an e-commerce website. But even though this Lighthouse score is high, and even though we, when we would only audit through Lighthouse, we could say, yes, it is great. Like this is what we wanted to achieve. If you take a look at the real world results, you will see that they're terrible. They're really terrible. And this is definitely not a good experience. So this is always the thing you should optimize, because what's the point of having 81 performance score if it has really no effect on your users? And that's it. That's it. And I wanted to quickly summarize everything that we have learned today. And I'm pretty hopeful that you will not treat this presentation only as a warning about not using Lighthouse blindly, but in general, a warning to not use any data blindly without not knowing the context. Because Lighthouse, it is really a great tool, and it should be used, and it has its use cases, but be aware of where this data comes from. Be aware that it is just an algorithm that can be tricked, and always base your business decisions on the real world data, not a syntactic number. Well, that's it. Thank you so much. If you want to follow me on Twitter, I'm Filip Rakowski. I'm often posting web performance tips. I'm also running a developer newsletter where I build Vue Storefront in public, so you can follow that as well. And that's it. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you. And yes, go follow on Twitter. I know I can only imagine that you probably know what my first question is, but I'm going to ask it anyway. Of what operating system?
Yeah, I haven't guessed that. So I have macOS. And I'm a fan of macOS. I'm not a fan of MacBooks because all the ones that I had were breaking in different circumstances. But Windows is also a great operating system. Like really, it is getting better and better and better. And if you have a PTSD after using Windows and switch to Macs, for a few years, it's actually worth trying it out, because it's even good for programming these days.
That is good to know. That is good to know, because the poll is now macOS is 50%, Linux is 30%. Other, we got 1.5, and Windows went down a little bit to 18%. So 18. It's very interesting. Yeah, it's very interesting to see the dynamics change as we're going through the conference. Now, back to more asking you questions about Lighthouse. What steps can developers and companies take to ensure they are properly using and interpreting? See if I can talk. The results, because you in the recap you talked about making sure that it's real world data instead of synthetic data, but how does somebody verify that?
Yeah, I mean, it's quite easy. The synthetic data, when we are talking about the synthetic data, this is the data that comes from the Lighthouse. When we are talking about the real world data, this is the data that comes from the Chrome user experience dashboard. So the short answer is, if you want to ensure that you're properly using and interpreting the results of Lighthouse, don't use Lighthouse.
Okay, fair enough.
No, this is just this is just a shortcut, but the question was also a shortcut, because the whole point was that Lighthouse itself, as a tool, it has its purpose, and this purpose is actually measuring if the performance was better or worse. But when we want to make any business decision, when we want to really see how our users are experiencing our websites, not how developers with MacBooks are experiencing our websites, this is where you're going to the Chrome user experience dashboard. And it's actually a fascinating place. And you can basically type any URL and you will get that data. You will also see how many people is browsing it from mobile, how many people is browsing it from desktop. It's pretty useful. And your Chrome devices, like your devices with Chrome, they are sending this data automatically. You can disable that, but why would you?
I feel like you, especially with automatically, and you talked about like disable, like some people would want to disable it, but that leads into what are the techniques of automate testing your web pages. So are there other tools that you would suggest then?
Well, there's a lot of them. Like internally in Vue Storefront, we use speed curve.
Okay.
Also, web page test. Web page test, I think, is one of the best in the industry right now. They also came up with a very interesting feature recently that is giving you a hint of the things that you could optimize on your website, but they're much more actionable than the ones from Google Lighthouse. So web page test is definitely worth checking out.
Okay. And I'm really curious about this one too. This is one from the audience, but how does Google Lighthouse compare to other website testing tools like GTmetrix and Pingdom? I spent, oh gosh, I worked at GoDaddy for 5 years, and that was, we almost officially told people to go off of GTmetrix when testing their websites all the time. Yet, now that I'm out of that world, seeing that there's so many other options, how does Google Lighthouse stack up?
So first of all, like Google Lighthouse is actually used by many of those tools under the hood. So this Lighthouse CI script that I showed you. So what Lighthouse CI script is doing, it's basically under the hood just running Lighthouse as a node script. So this is being used by really many monitoring tools. And I think, that's mostly all I want to say, because the truth is Lighthouse is not giving you that much information. It's giving you just the basic information. Like GTmetrix, especially GTmetrix, it's telling you everything, right?
Yeah.
And even web page test, it's much richer. So I would say Lighthouse is a great tool to just quickly look up things, but I don't know any professional who is using it.
Okay, that's good to know. And then last question is, how do I ensure my tests cover all aspects of my web page, including pop-ups and modals?
I'm not sure I understand the context, but I assume, yeah.
Like when you have page clicks, does it count for a click would be to the modal and then one other click would go to the web page, or do those count as one click? Or like are there tools to gauge that and separate them more than just like what somebody went to the web page on?
So, okay, maybe I'll try to answer this from a different angle, from a Lighthouse angle, because I guess we have to interpret this question. So looking at the Lighthouse, from the Lighthouse angle, they recently, maybe not that recently, released a feature that is allowing you to actually map the whole user journey and test this journey. So this way you can also, if this path of going into a website, opening a pop-up, and then going, signing in or registering is important for you, and you want to measure performance here, then you can do this. You can also do this at web page test and any other pages. Yeah.
All right.
That's my interpretation.
I dig it. I think that'll work. And last but not least, before you sign off, everyone make sure that you go follow Filip. His Twitter handle is there. So make sure, or there, I have no idea which way of the screen I'm actually like looking at. So look at the thing at the bottom, and follow on Twitter. Make sure that you stay up to date. And is there anything that I'm missing that you would like to say?
I don't know. Good evening to everyone.
Perfect. I
think there is still 1 or 2 talks, so have fun the next day.
Perfect. Well, thank you, Filip. See you again. And I know there will be more conferences. So thank you.